This conference will now be recorded.
Hi, Andrea.
Hi, morning, Sia.
Yeah. Hi, Roberto.
Hello, Shay.
Good morning, Roberto. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning to all of you.
Good morning, good morning.
Okay, good morning to all of you. Again, my name is Roberto Suarez. I am the Secretary-General of the International Organization of Employers. I want to thank you for joining us in this digital exchange, which basically wants to strengthen the links between employers and business organizations, and also the UN resident coordinators through collective action to address COVID-19 impacts. I don't want to detail the consequence, the disastrous consequence of the COVID-19 in our economies, in employment, also in terms of health for individuals, health for workers, health for employers also, and how we need to act quicker and more jointly than ever to protect lives, to protect livelihoods, especially in developing economies, to build also for the future sustainable models, economic models, but also, let's put it like that, societal models, okay? The aim of this meeting, of this digital meeting, is to gather, and we wanted to have a kind of restricted format, not a big gathering, as the one that we have organized in the past as IOE, to have a kind of first impressions with UN resident coordinators about their expectations on business and business organizations, like not just IOE, but our members on the ground, our more than 150 members in almost 150 countries, the representative business organizations, the ones that are being consulted on a daily basis by governments, especially on employment measures, but also another measure related to incentives and stimulus, liquidity to recover from the disaster. I want to first of all thank the support that we have had from the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, and a special thanks to the Executive Director, Mrs. Andrea Oostheimer de Sosa, who is joining us. So thank you very much for your support, and that's the initial setting of a longer exchange of discussions. But also I want to thank especially the presence of the distinguished UN resident coordinators in 3 areas. One is Mrs. Marina Walter, the UN resident coordinator in Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname, Aruba, Curacao, and San Maarten in the Caribbean. Thank you very much for joining us. I also want to thank very much the president of Mrs. Rosa Malango, the UN resident coordinator of Uganda. And I also want to thank Mrs. Françoise Jacob, the UN resident coordinator of Serbia. The thanks also goes to the other panelists in this digital exchange, employers and business organizations, and we'll have with us the CEO. I would ask also to mute yourself, please, because that helps us for a proper sound efficiency exchange. I also wanted to thank Mrs. Stephanie Fingal, the CEO of the Employers Consultative Association in Trinidad and Tobago, who is going also to intervene. I don't know if we have finally the presence of the Secretary-General of Coparmex. I think so, Mr. Jose Medina Mora, one of the most representative organizations in Mexico, which is also suffering especially the consequence of the pandemic in a very, very complex political situation. So thank you also for joining us. And we also want to thank the president of the Federation of the Maldivian Employer, Mr. Mohamed Ali Janah, who is also supporting us in an initiative linked to the Youth Academy of Employers Organizations. I think I forgot also to mention with us the presence of Mrs. Catherine Ashwell, the UN resident coordinators of Maldives. Also, thank you so much for joining us. Last and not least, I also want to thank Mrs. Natasha Pavlovic-Bujas, the president of the Serbian Association of Employers, also an important member of IOE, one of the most important organizations in the country. So thank you again. I would like also to give the floor now to Andrea, and yes, to help us setting the context and how we can also liaise better our activities, the employers organizations activities, the business organization activities, and the work of the UN resident coordinator. We are very much aware of the UN reform. We have been discussing that thoroughly in several forums, in the ILO, but also in other exchanges that we had during the last year, also in New York. And we really want, and that's what the message that we passed to Mr. Antonio Guterres when we have the last exchange that we had with him. It was last year, that we really want to add value. And this value added is more pertinent now than ever. We need to change the policies. We need to recover quickly. We need to get liquidity. UN resident coordinator activities can be very, very helpful for us, and we want also to support what you are doing. So Andrea, the floor is now yours. I have also to be also sincere with you. I have to be more or less strict with time so that everybody has the opportunity to have its contributions. At the same time, I want to tell you that we have a chat system on the right side. Please use this chat system. It's very useful because what we will do at the end is to sum up all the questions and raise them in in the exchange that we have. Andrea, the floor is yours. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Roberto, and warm greetings to everybody from New York. I'm Andrea Ostheimer. I'm the director of the Office of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung in New York and in charge of liaison with the United Nations. Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung is one of the 6 political foundations that we have in Germany, and we are funded by the German Parliament, but we are independent entities. In this, we differ from the technical cooperation agencies that you might know, such as GIZ or KfW. KAS is affiliated with the party of Chancellor Angela Merkel, the CDU. So therefore, we as the political foundation champion a social market economy. And the concept of social market economy is certainly one of the brands that stands for quite often it gets confused with the social democratic approach of distribution.
Please mute yourself because we cannot hear well, Andrea. If you not mute yourself. Sorry, Andrea, to interrupt you.
So, but quite often it gets confused with the social democratic approach of redistribution. But to the contrary, the concept of a social market economy is liberal. It underlines the value of a free market, but within a framework of rules. Rule of law is paramount, but equally is a social safety net, catering particularly for those who cannot be integrated into a market economy. And particularly during these days of economic shutdowns and the pandemic, we see the differences of impact on societies, whether it's an ultra-liberal market economy as in the US, or in a social market economy as in Germany, where particularly the bonds between employers and employees are kept up through state intervention for the time of economic perils. Coming from this socioeconomic conceptual approach, it's a natural move for us to reach out to the private sector for the implementation of the Agenda 2030. And the CAS office in New York is one of the over 100 country offices that we have worldwide. And with our colleagues in Germany, we aim to draw attention to the need for policy alignments which foster the SDGs. Unfortunately, we are not in all countries that are represented today, but we have, for example, offices in Kampala and in Belgrade, and you might even know my colleagues there. So, dear participants, when we are discussing today the question of how to enhance the cooperation of UN resident coordinators and employer and business associations, I think the timing could not be better. The reform of the UN development system is fully underway. Member states will start this week with a review of the QCPR, the Quadrennial Comprehensive Policy Review of the UN system, which will look into the repositioning of the United Nations development system and its affirmation as it has been laid out in GA Resolution 279 from 2018. Without doubt, the reforms mainly concern the UN internal structures and processes, the build-up of a new generation of country teams and the interactions on the ground between agencies, funds and programs. However, the quality of support rendered by the UN country teams to countries and their efforts to implement the SDGs, this will largely depend on bringing all key actors on board. And these key actors are not only state actors. They also encompass the private sector as well as civil society. And in fact, it's encouraging to see how business tries to hold governments accountable to move forward on the SDGs. It was just 2 days ago when 155 companies signed a statement urging governments to align their COVID-19 economic aid and recovery efforts with the latest climate science and to urge net zero emissions recovery from COVID-19. And I recall when the Global Investors Alliance for Sustainable Development convened for the first time in October last year. It was at that time that the head of the German insurance company Allianz and also one of the chairpersons, he complained that business could do much more if they would have the adequate policy frameworks. Therefore, the private sector has become a strategic partner for the UN development system, and more interaction on the ground in countries could also be of benefit for all. So, dear participants, I think also when we speak about timing, we also have to take into consideration that multilateralism, in fact, is facing probably the most serious threat since its establishment in 1945. At the same time, COVID-19 and the pandemic shows that nations have to work together in order to contain the spread, to develop vaccines, but also to address the social and economic challenges. Not only nations have to cooperate, but we need the whole of government and a comprehensive multi-stakeholder approach. Certainly, the manifold crises that we are facing today also underline that multilateralism in the 21st century has to shed off its mere intergovernmental character. It has to become a multilateralism that strengthens the relationships between state and non-state actors in order to further the common good and therefore also the Agenda 2030. So in this regard, I hope that today's exchange will provide us with insights into bottlenecks of cooperation between the UN system, national governments and the private sector, but also can allude us to best practices of cooperation that can also be an inspiration to others. And with this short introduction into the motivation why we as CAS are co-hosting with IOE such an exchange, which hopefully will be also one of many more, I would like to thank particularly IOE and Roberto Suarez, Chiagopol and Matthias Thorns for this cooperation, which I think is really, really important to foster these kind of multi-stakeholder approaches. So I leave it with thanking you, all of you, for your interest and for also dedicating your time. And I hand over to Roberto.
Thank you, Andrea. I think that this point that you refer to the Social Democrat also having a liberal component, I think is quite pertinent. It's quite pertinent now in times in which we really need also to perhaps look at things differently and look at ways of also developing our business models in a way which is sustainable. We have been defending that for a while, but I think right now it's time also to push this this agenda, which has to do also with a proper business environment. That's also what we defend. So I now go into the next panelist, and I would like to ask Mrs. Marina Walter, the resident coordinator again. Thank you very much of Trinidad, Tobago, Suriname, Aruba, Curacao, and Saint Maarten, and how you see our role. How can we help you better? And after that, we'll have a complementary intervention of Stephanie Fingal from the Employers Consultative Association of Trinidad Tobago, the CEO, the Secretary, the Executive Director. So Marina, you have the floor, and thank you again for joining us.
Not at all, it's my pleasure. I hope you can hear me well. Perfect. Excellent. I had a little bit of an early morning hiccup at 7:40 here in Trinidad with the internet, so I was worried, but
thank you for the effort.
I'm glad it passed. No, colleagues, thank you so much for inviting me and the other resident coordinators to this exchange this morning. We really, really appreciate it. In particular, as Andrea, I believe, said, it couldn't come at a more urgent time. It couldn't be timed better as we're all kind of coming out of this, COVID-19 emergency, learning a lot of lessons again, and in particular, again, falling on the importance of business. I think I was asked this morning just to reflect a little bit on the role of business organizations, and so as it was clear before, but will also apply in the post-COVID-19 world very much. The role of business, private sector in this whole 2030 agenda is absolute key. And it's not a coincidence that, the goal 17 very much points to partnerships, which means, and I think that's what I keep on reiterating very often, that it's not just about the transfer of funds, it's about a real partnership, a partnership in co-creating approaches and really working out together these models of the future. as you all know, everyone here around this virtual conference room, the SDGs were formulated after negotiations with multiple sectors for quite some time, but very much also with the business sector. And the process and the finalization of the goals, the 2030 agenda, very much, pointed to the particular role business has and can play in accomplishing the SDGs. Just to name a few, the private sector really impacts public and individual finances, but also the well-being very much of people around the planet. They can help, and we've seen it a lot, solve human problems through, innovation, their product services. They, maybe on the less positive note at times, can also exacerbate environmental problems, but then are also part of solving the issues around it. And key, I think, is that they, private sector businesses have access to capital and talent beyond any other player, beyond governments. And when using them, and I think we've seen that a lot around the globe, in an innovative, in a constructive manner, they can move, so to say, the needle on any given sustainable development goal more than any single government, to be quite honest. We've seen different numbers, but it's been said around the globe that achieving these SDGs will cost us something in the area of $12 trillion. There is only one segment of society with access to this level of capital, and that's the private sector. Also, at the end of the day, it will be down to governments to tackle the SDGs really, the implementation of it at the national level. The goals cannot be achieved without a meaningful collaboration, partnership, and action by business, and that's just something that we have to take into account in every step that we're doing. Business has a key role to play, not just to, so to say, an engine of economic growth and employment, but also and predominantly as a source of finance, technology, and innovation. And I think the role is also very much expressed and enshrined, in those 10 principles of the Global Compact, the UN Global Compact, that outlines how this applies in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, anti-corruption, and really, so to say, underscores what role business can play in helping to respect human rights, help support the decent work agenda, and promote, greater environmental responsibility and fight corruption, just to, name a few of those principles. I think from where we stand, the SDGs also represent an historic opportunity for businesses. And before having taken on my post here in the Caribbean, now in Trinidad, Tobago, I was heading the UN Development Program in India, where you would see the power of, let's say, the Tata Group, which of course is massive in size, but started to run with the SDGs, both reflecting on them as an internal guidance, but also taking this as a measurement to all of their businesses across India. And the power of that was just amazing, because in a way, the opportunity for business is obvious. Companies can use the SDGs to shape their strategies, goals, activities, allowing them very much to become more aligned to, so to say, the global priorities and capitalize on benefits. So it becomes a win-win. They can, and you've seen a lot of examples now around the globe, proactively address the SDGs, which will better manage their risks, anticipate consumer demands, help them secure access to needed resources, and in some cases open, new markets. Evidence shows that sustainable businesses very often outperform the market by engaging, inspiring talent, consumers, and investors. And companies we see that align themselves with the SDGs can also help governments achieve their goals, and so to better consolidate their license to operate, which differentiates them at times from their competitors. And last but not least, companies that invest in the SDGs support stable societies. That's very important in some of the more fragile states also. Markets and the supply of resources, which in reverse, of course, is the pillar that business is built on. And to move on, just to talk a little bit about, so to say, the example, what we see here in Trinidad and Tobago. The Twin Islands here have a very vibrant business sector that has already played a key role in the country's progress towards the 2030 agenda. And I would say not just the country, because a lot of the companies that are sitting here have a Caribbean impact, an impact across the whole region, and are supplying many of the other islands around. Entirely private and joint public private investments in SDG related initiatives are not common yet, I would say, but the situation is changing. For example, BP, Trinidad and Tobago, and Shell, the two largest companies operating here, embarking at the moment on a public-private partnership with the government to establish a solar facility, a solar electricity facility that aims to supply power to roughly something between 20 to 40% of all homes in the country. So that's quite a new turn coming from that segment of society. Currently, I'd say the most common way private sector becomes directly involved in development issues has been via, the corporate social responsibility. And these contributions to sustainability activities are in fact quite significant. Between 2015 and 2017, Trinidad and Tobago businesses have had CSR investments averaged at I think roughly $12 million a year. And again, given the size and the scale of these island economies, that's quite something. In comparison, my colleagues digged out the figure that the allocation of the Ministry of Social Development to social programs was 4.5 million in 2018. So you can see the significance of their contribution. But so what's the exchange between us now at the side of the UN, also the IFIs and business? The exchange that we have started and more engaged in is simply this discussion that while any CSR approach, of course, really contributes to funding the SDGs, it is not as effective as engaging businesses in really shifting those financing instruments, shifting the way companies operate, and co-creating together with the public hand, with partners like the United Nations, us, in changing the overall business context in a country. So the charitable actions are simply, at the end of the day, not as let's say effective, because very often they are also siloed away in the country and not always aligned with the SDGs or the country's own development agenda. And so I'd say since last year we have come also a long way in moving this conversation and saying, if we align it better and in a way that it's not just the one-off, but a continuous investment in changing some of the social economic context of the country, the impact of their investment will be so much more powerful. Maximizing the private sector CSR impact will also require a more organized CSR system that in the long run is harmonized with the SDGs, but will also make sure that it goes, so to say, beyond the CSR edge and really leads to changing the way business operates. With regards to, just quickly, the principles I referred to earlier of the UN's global impact, the private sector here in Trinidad and Tobago has been very proactive in many of those areas. The issue of human rights, that's generally a non-issue. Those principles are very well respected. If at all there are abuses, it happens in the so-called, black economy, the informal market. Businesses generally recognize the right to collective bargaining and not an issue at all. And discrimination or forced labor, just to name two examples, are really minor problems here on the islands, and child labor is similarly virtually non-existent. So really the business sector has already helped really move the development context of the country to really further and to a level where a lot of the rights that are hard fought for in other countries, again, I remember my India experience, are a non-issue here. That has been cleared up, and the way forward is a lot more straight. In some areas, in fact, businesses have here in the country been the trailblazers. Trinidad and Tobago is 7 miles off the coast of Venezuela, and so at the receiving end of a good number of Venezuelan migrants and refugees. And in fact, it was also back the initiative of businesses helping with the government to really advocate for the registration, the legalization of migrants, opening up employment opportunities for registered migrants, and very much also sending this message to the government saying, look, if you engage in getting them a simple registration card, we as a business are interested to provide them for an opportunity to work in the livelihood, which is a beautiful win-win. So that in itself was an amazing example of how business, in fact, the private sector can be the one, moving the needle forward. Just to end, another brilliant example in Trinidad and Tobago has also been by the way, the engagement with the extractives industry, where again, the private sector and the energy sector accounts for, I think, almost 80% of the exports and about half of the GDP here in the country. But energy companies here in the country pushed for the country to become a member of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. So just to mention, that was another area where it was private sector pushing the country into more transparency and much more clarity how decisions around extractive industries and extractive resources are being made in the country. So, another amazing example of business pushing almost more than the governments in place. Just very quickly and to end, and I know that the next panel will reflect on the COVID-19 response, but we just recently, 2 weeks ago, in the middle and kind of coming out of the worst management of the COVID-19 crisis, where, by the way, the country, Trinidad and Tobago, had done an amazing job in really managing this crisis. But 2 weeks ago, we met with key CEOs from some of the companies, again, that operate here, but also across the Caribbean, to really start looking into what's the long-term impact, and again, what role, and even more urgent role, can business play in getting the country back to achieving those SDGs, right? I mean, the past was relatively stable, and now we're seeing in many of those sustainable development goals, so to say, a rollback, right? Because the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19 on many countries, but especially the small island states, will be quite brutal. And just to say, so that the attitude was fantastic, the willingness to come in, and just, to give you one example, one of the issues that is sticking out across small island states is this issue of food security. Always talked about, but COVID-19 really, got it to the forefront of that there is a need not just to talk about diversifying economies and, for example, rejuvenate, reinvent agri businesses and supply chains, but it has become so much more urgent to in fact do that. And the business sector, the colleagues around the table were very much in tune with that, and we are now, among a couple of other things, we agreed that in this case, on this particular issue, we'll be putting for starters a white paper together, but hopefully leading to a sort of prototype that the business sector, 1 or 2 companies volunteered already, together with the public hand and the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, will try to put on the ground to, in a very concrete way, start to see how can business, UN, public hand, collaborate on really changing the setup and the fabric of a country and an economy, and that gets them right back, gets the country right back on this trajectory towards the SDGs. I would have more examples, but I think I'll leave it at that.
Marina, this last also point in this survey, this report that you're making, how we can collaborate better, how we can be very, much more effective, perhaps working together. You refer to something which is very important for us. Sometimes it's not just the capital or the funding or transfer of funds, or sometimes it's the knowledge that the business have in infrastructure, in building educational systems that are already working, in helping in employment policies. And sometimes, and that's where I would like to call your attention for the discussion, the issue is how we have an influence changing the policies, the regulations, the institutions, the implementation, and that's where I think it's critical. We are members of the board of the Global Compact, and we are very complementary, okay? And we have excellent relations with all the team of the Global Compact. Our members are members of the Compact. But perhaps the complementary angle of business and employees organizations is this influence and policy, which can really push the agenda. You referred to perhaps there is a slow path on the business model angle on how we change that's where business organizations can really help perhaps more beyond the contributions of also of companies, our members, and that's where I would like you also to liaise. And that's for me the link that I'm now going to do with the next speaker, who is our friend from the consultative body in Trinidad and Tobago, and a very active member of IOE, also have to say. So you have the floor. I have the team reminding me that I had to be more diligent with the time managing, so I have to be much more German. I could use this word with you. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's quite all right. So do stop me when you're ready. Just say time to stop.
Okay.
Thank you so very much. Good morning, Stephanie Fingal from the Employers Consultative Association of Trinidad and Tobago. Good morning and good afternoon. I know some of us are in the afternoon already. And thanks for inviting us to this participate this conference today. Ms. Walter's contribution very much hinged on some of what we want to say. And so I'll just go right into it. As the ECA, our view is that the primary target group of the SDGs are governments, while businesses will complement that, but really it really is targeted towards governments, who we expect to translate these goals into national action plans, policies, and initiatives, while reflecting on different realities and capacities of our individual country. SDGs are also designed, we understand, to rally a wide range of organizations to shape priorities and aspirations for sustainable development efforts around a common framework. The ECA believes that the private sector can play an important role in the achievement of Trinidad and Tobago's Vision 2030 agenda. And the best way to prioritize impact areas for businesses would be to look at the value chain and identify the activities that can be undertaken to reduce potential negative impact on specific SDGs at every step of the value chain. Ms. Walter just mentioned some of the big energy companies like BP, for instance, and some of those companies already do that, whereby along the value chain, certain policies and certain activities must be maintained if business is to be done with other entities. So by developing and delivering solutions for the achievement of SDGs, businesses will discover new growth opportunities, improvement in their way of doing business, lower their risk profiles. And we believe that the benefits will include identifying new and future sustainable opportunities, enhancing the value of corporate sustainability, strengthening stakeholder relations, and keeping pace with policy developments. It will stabilize our society, markets, and our environment. And we'll be speaking a common language, trying to achieve a common purpose. We acknowledge, though, that not all of the 17 SDGs will be equally relevant for all business sectors, and that the response and contributions will definitely depend on the risks and opportunities that are presented for different businesses. Trinidad and Tobago is a small twin island state of just over 1.35 million people. We have just about 640,000 of those persons citizens make up the workforce. We have our own challenges and we have our positive and some of the difficulties we experience are. So the positives are we are diverse and inclusive culture, we are creative people, fun-loving, most people know that, resilient, we have free education in this country right up to tertiary level and free health care. But we have some difficulties. We have a high crime rate, inconsistent level of law enforcement in certain areas. We have some weak social partnerships, and we're working hard at that right now. Difficulties in implementing sustainable development policies within the current context of economic decline, having based on an oil energy economy, as well as COVID-19, as we will all realize, has impacted our economy. We do have also low productivity and a culture, a poor work ethic culture, which again is a major issue for us and for businesses. Slow diversification, our economy has not diversified to the extent that we should have, as far as we are concerned as the Employers Association. And low availability of financing for investments towards the implementation of SDGs. And this is where the private sector can come in. Our Vision 2030, the focus is the government has 5 core themes. People first, nurturing our greatest asset, good governance and service excellence, quality infrastructure and transportation, building globally competitive businesses, and placing the environment at the center of social and economic development. Invariably, these 5 thematic areas have been designed to align with the government's Agenda 2030 by ensuring the pursuit of development pillars and also supporting the attainment of goals and targets of the SDGs. Our alignment at this, I'm continuing a bit. Our alignment at this time, though, is about 81%. But we know that we have to have a more vigilant assessment of the long-term impact on our country's social welfare programs, our existing programs, our education system, and things like that. We also believe that there is an opportunity for infrastructure development supported by the private sector. We have a fairly high liquidity in Trinidad and Tobago, and businesses can contribute to that. And one of the other difficulties is the enforcement of law, as I said earlier. A key goal is the maintain sanitation and clean cities, and under Goal 4. And in Trinidad and Tobago, that is something that we believe businesses can contribute to by themselves, promoting and adhering to some of the laws we have in the country. Our labor laws are also something that we contribute to. And as the employers associations, we encourage businesses to participate and give their views as we advocate for revision to the legislation. So those are just some of the additional things that we consider businesses being able to contribute towards in attaining our SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I think you have made rich contribution, highlighting several angles. I would say that one of the first ones, which I think is important, is the SDG is also an opportunity approach. Also from a business and employee organization perspective, the way forward is to use that as having a common language. And believe me, it's very difficult to have sometimes a common language within the UN and business. And I'm telling it you by experience. And when we want to participate in joint approach, joint partnership, we as IOE, but also our members, what we find is the language is not the same, it's not connected. The communication element is very, very challenging. And the way we can see also the SDG is a way also to alienate to some extent the language, but also to have a different relation with the stakeholders, which is something that perhaps the business and employees organization have not developed. I had one question is whether, I think that we are going to wait until the end to raise all the questions that are now appearing in the chat, but if you can also look at them, just so that you are prepared for the answers, that would be great, okay? So I now am going to the next panel so that we go all together, and then the final point will be precisely on questions and answers and a deeper exchange on some of the points that you have raised, okay? So I have to say that we have last minute apologies from the UN resident coordinator of Uganda, and I referred to her before. It was Rose, but she has been replaced by Mr. Orlan Saif Naler, I don't know whether I pronounce the name well, and a distinguished representative of UNFPA. Thank you very much for joining us. So the question to you is more perhaps focused on the COVID-19 pandemic, how we really can make a difference for recovery from the economic devastating effects that we'll have in all countries, I would say more in some countries than others, but also the social and employment effects. So that would be the question, and how we can help the UN efforts in that regard. And that's the same question that I will raise, but perhaps from another angle, to the resident coordinator of the Maldives, Madame Hashel, who is also joining, and also to the distinguished president of the National Federation of Maldivian Employers. So, Alan, you have the floor now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and it's a pleasure really to step in for Rosa, who fell sick this morning. Let me just go straight to the point, and you know, we would like to look at a couple of issues here that we want to share. The first is that the expectations really for cooperation with businesses and business federations in Uganda, what have they been since COVID? Now, first of all, there was a good degree of repurposing to respond to COVID and its impact. Businesses and business federations in Uganda have contributed to the government calls in solidarity and contributed financial and in kind to the national task force that was established by the president to deal with COVID. But more importantly, they have really tried to adjust to respond to the very fast spread of COVID and its impacts. So, for example, the National Bureau of Standards of Uganda has approved 18 factories to produce hand sanitizers, up from only one factory 3 months ago. Also, the Uganda Manufacturers Association reports that they will soon have the capacity to produce 1.2 million masks a day from the 18 members of the UMA, this is the Uganda Manufacturers Association. And so that it is expected that the factories in Uganda will be able to meet the demand for reusable masks for the entire population, which currently stands at 42 million people. Secondly, you know, and this is something that, of course, as UNFPA rep is very close to our heart. You know, Uganda has the second youngest population in the world, with 78% of the population under the age of 30. Now, every year, 40,000 youth graduate from tertiary institutions, and only 20% of those are able to find some kind of employment. Now, with COVID, the private sector has the highest potential and should employ young people productively, which is in the interest, of course, of business and federations. But it is a very difficult task because of the limited movements and access just to markets. And although they might then have purchasing power, it is a very difficult agenda that we are trying to grapple with. We also look at mentoring and internships. For example, the gaps in skills that are required by the job market by graduates from tertiary institutions contributes to large parts of unemployment in Uganda and in other parts of Africa. Now, what we have seen is with COVID is that the new normal sets of skills, particularly the online and digital skills, will be required in the job market. And business and business federations should contribute to address these skills gaps through mentoring and internships. So what we have done in Uganda is that with the Ministry of Labor and the UN, we have developed a graduate volunteer scheme, which enables new graduates to work and partnering with government organizations or the UN and so forth. The issue of skilling. You know, this new normal will require new skills in the job market, and you know, businesses can harness this opportunity to establish training institutions to provide these relevant skills, or to partner with academic and vocational institution research and development to strengthen their capacity. We are also looking at best practices, and this is now, you know, not unrelated to what my colleague from Trinidad just illustrated. So the Agenda 2030 requires that businesses and the federations maintain best practices to promote the SDGs, right? So the respect of labor laws is very necessary. It's more than necessary than before. The Federation of Uganda Employers enhanced partnerships with the Ministry of Labor, but also with our ministry, the Office of the Prime Minister, in amplifying perspectives of employers in the development of the different sectoral COVID-19 response plans. I'd like to give a few examples. For example, tax waivers, patents for production of basic PPEs, but also rescheduling of the entire National Social Security Fund, catalytic interventions to revamp business continuity support during and after the lockdown, but also companies that are responding to the crisis in many ways, from encouraging teleworking, issuing occupational health and safety advice and guidance to retain essential workers. Just like to share a few experiences in how we've been cooperating with businesses. As you might know, Uganda is the third largest country in the world receiving refugees. So we currently have a population of 1.4 million refugees, and that is the highest in Africa. The other two countries being Pakistan and Lebanon. So during the Solidarity Summit that we had in 2017, MTN, for example, which is a South African mobile telephone company, donated 1 billion Uganda shillings through the UN High Commissioner for Refugees for medical facilities. We have the establishment of the Private Sector Foundation that was established with UNDP in the 1990s. There's collaboration with the Uganda Chamber of Commerce, also collaboration with the Uganda Investment Authority. Then of late, we've witnessed the Gender Seal Initiative, again, that's UNDP spearheading, you know, the support to 42 public and private enterprises to implement that Gender Equality Seal program, which calls for gender equality at the workplace. We have the Uganda Private Sector Platform for the SDGs. We have a Kampala Innovation Week. And then we have, and of course, Françoise and my colleague in Trinidad will know this as well, the New Generation UNCT, where we are bringing multi-stakeholders into the meetings the regular meetings of the UN country team. So of late, really, and this really is over the last weeks, right? Because we've had the lockdown here since 18th of March. So we have had, with private sector, we've had e-conferences and dialogues. As I said, there has been a strong support from, you probably have seen this in the news, from Jack Ma from China, from Alibaba, to support Uganda with a large number of consignment of PPE. Then we have just recently, I think this was 2 or 3 weeks ago, launched an emergency appeal, and that again we've brought in here the private sector, the Red Cross, and of course government and different NGOs to the tune of $316 million to the response to COVID and its impacts. And so here I mentioned this because here some private companies and corporations have expressed interest in contributing to these efforts. So I want to finish here. I hope you find these examples useful, and I'm very happy to contribute to the chats later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I think it has been very interesting because you raised issues related to the contribution of the private sector with the health systems right now. You refer to the skills and the policy change that you need and how the private sector is also trying to engage through the employees organization. You refer also to engagement in back to work policies, no, on telework policies, and also on social security funds. I think that's also elements that we have to realize. Again, it's about sometimes financial contribution, sometimes it's expertise, but sometimes it's pushing the agenda, policy speaking, where we can make a difference. So thank you so much. That was very interesting.
Thank you.
Let's move also to the other speakers in the same panel. We have now Mr. Mohamed Ali, President of the National Federation of Maldivian Employers. Thank you again for joining us. You have the floor. You have to mute.
Unmute.
Yes, it's very
Sorry,
often.
sorry. Good evening and good afternoon and good morning to everyone. It's late afternoon in the Maldives, almost sunset here. Thank you for the invitation. I wanted to share my screen, but it's not allowing me, so I'll continue with what I have prepared for today. Yeah. Maldives became a member of IOE in November last year. That's my screen. Yeah, you can see that, right?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah. So we became a member of IOE last year in November. Current situation in the Maldives, we have on the COVID situation, we have about 1,046 cases with 91 recoveries, and we have a huge expat population. The population of Maldives, the local population is about 360,000, but the expat community is almost equal. So we have about 600,000 people living in this country. Out of that, 50.83% affected are from Bangladesh, and 12.9% are other nationalities. So the affected locals are about 36.22%. I'm also the president of the Maldives Contractors Association. We have done a full report. The government had 10 billion rupiah. $1 is about 15 rupiah here. So it's about, they stopped about 700 million US dollars worth of projects, and they're just continuing with 200 million worth of projects currently. In addition to that, the losses that is faced by the construction industry amounts to about $60 million for the last 3 months. All the sites are closed, construction has declined by 50%, and employees are struggling to pay wages and living costs. The main industry in the country, and 75% of the receipts to the budget and to the foreign exchange is coming from tourism. As you know, Maldives is a tourist destination. The borders closed on 27th March, and bed nights went down by 40%, and it's entirely zero now. It's negative, so the entire country is suffering a lot. Our resorts, we have 150 resorts. What you see on the postcards and around the world, all are closed, and we are taking austerity measures. I'm also a resort owner. I have 5 resorts that I own, and we are taking austerity measures, and which is affecting the employees severely, but we are trying to mitigate the situation. Boats, safaris, super yachts, all other yachts are idle with no guests. So restaurants and all food outlets are closed in the country, except essential food deliveries. Fisheries is the only industry that's functioning right now, which is the 3rd largest industry. Tourism, construction, and fisheries. But even fisheries is affected because most of our exports goes to the US and to Europe, and the export restrictions in those countries are affecting. So basically, Maldives is at a halt, and the World Bank and the IMF and the ADB, Asian Development Bank, they have identified Maldives as one of the countries that would be most hit under the current situation. Our economy is expected to fall by 11.5% this year. Anticipated budget is expected to reduce by 49%, and the Asian Development Bank is saying that we will have a net loss of 294 million even in the next few months. Government has cut down costs up to about $700 million, And we have been managing the entire situation by building temporary facilities, and that is costing us about 100 million US dollars at the moment. Ministry of Finance estimates the budget deficit to reach about 1 billion US dollars in the next quarters of this year. We have released a very comprehensive report, and as the head of the several associations, we are coming up with the impact on various industries in the country. So we are presenting it to the president and to the cabinet, and it's well received by the ministers and the president himself. Situation of the people in this country, the employers and employees, with almost all modes of income at halt, employers are struggling to pay rents, wages, and living costs to the staff. They are forced to reduce salary or lay off staff. More than half the employees in the construction sectors are on the verge of collapse, as most companies are SMEs in the construction industry. All resorts are non-operational, expect low income even if the borders are open, and thus are obligated for austerity measures. And another major issue we have is that we do not have enough PPE for the staff, especially in the construction site where many expatriates will be working together once the lockdown opens. In the construction industry, we have about 5,000 to 7,000 local people and 40 to 50,000 expatriates working from various nationalities, and major nationalities coming from Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and the rest of the Southeast Asian region. Private sectors have reduced staff and reduced wages which is very unfortunate. Government and the state-owned enterprises are also reducing salaries, except for the frontline staff. During the pandemic, the government has come up with a scheme where those who lose their jobs, the government would pay 5,000 rupiah a month. 5,000 is about $300 US a month for the next 3 months, and they have to register on a job portal. So they have so far 1,300 Maldivians who have registered on the portal so far, and the government is making payments. And for those who, some of the resorts and some of the employees are paying a little bit less than 5,000, but the government is buffering that and then making sure that those who are also receiving less than that amount are receiving enough to meet. So 5,000 is a manageable situation just to stay at home and get their daily food and feed for themselves. Majority of the landlords have reduced rents in the Maldives. However, people are unable to manage their rents and expenses with the loss of jobs and part of the income. The expatriate labor force is a huge, it has a big impact on the economy. It has a big impact on the entire country, socially, culturally, and also economically. The construction industry has 40%, and the rest are in trading, tourism. So we have about 250,000. There are about 50,000 illegal immigrants, and this has become a major issue because they are like day wage laborers who have been on the road, and they get jobs on a daily basis. Now that this has happened, the lockdown has happened, the government is in a crisis situation because these people are not earning money, so they don't have a place to stay. So they have started building, temporary accommodation facilities, and we are, as businessmen, contributing to help build these facilities with the government. The government have also got our help from the business community, and especially from groups of people like us. We have given our resorts to the government to accommodate the people who are positive, so that they are quarantined, they are isolated. So several resorts have been allocated, and we have contributed by giving our beautiful islands to make sure that the country is protected once a positive case is found, and they could trace the people. And some are isolated, some are quarantined once the positive cases are traced. A lot of workers are also stuck without repatriation because they have lost their jobs. They want to go back to their country, but the borders are closed, and the Maldives border is also closed. And illegal workers, the undocumented workers, are struggling to manage their food and living. The Maldives Red Crescent with the United Nations facilities are doing a lot to help with these people. Government is arranging temporary and permanent accommodation for these expatriate workers. What can we do? you know, the social problems have, you know, come up in a very big way. So I believe that the only way out of this situation is that we need to start a campaign to create awareness on how to navigate in the new norm. Occupational health and safety have become more important than it was ever before, and this needs to be instilled on all the industries. The most important thing is to raise the awareness in all industries and how to practice safety and health at work sites. I have come up with our own policies, although government has no occupational health and safety policies. Our NGO has come up with our own draft, and it has been shared, and we have started training various industries. The first session of 100 people was held last week, so we are doing that on our own. And we are going to conduct this together collectively. This is also the time, because there is a huge issue, a big backlash coming from the local community here, saying that, you know, send back all the expat labor force, give jobs to the Maldivians. So the only way we can, you know, I told the cabinet the other day, some of the cabinet ministers, they had a session on Zoom, and I told, look, the only way we can get Maldivians to have jobs is that we have to train them, we have to get the skills, the necessary skills for them. So I think why we depend heavily on foreign workers is the lack of skills of Maldivians in certain sectors. We must identify these sectors and fields and focus on training Maldivians to be prepared to recommence our industries and economy with better trained local Maldivians. Vocational, skilled, and even basic training courses can be organized. We also have a big issue of mismanagement of labor in the country. So we need to work on management of foreign labor, assist the government authorities on the regularization of and repatriation of illegal migrant workers, work on refining the immigration on quota systems. The system we have now is weak, and we need to strengthen this. What can we do? The Maldives joined ILO a couple of years back, but we are not having that concept of the tripartite dialogue. Even now, when people are losing jobs, the government is not sitting with both employer and employee associations. That concept is not there. So it is the right and opportune time for us to, you know, set an example by starting this new, you know, concept, which is new to the Maldives. ILO, International Labour Organization, had recognized our federation as the representative of employers in their tripartite discussions, but right now that is not happening. So the government needs to involve employers and employees in these discussions. And right now the rights of many employers and employees are lost. Many have lost their jobs. What can we do? When we do this, it will help take some forward steps towards the Agenda 2030. Right now, the people and prosperity under the agenda are compromised heavily due to the current pandemic. Poverty and hunger are expected to rise. Economies are close to collapse, and Maldives is no different.
Thank you so much, Mr. President.
So that's it.
It has been very comprehensive intervention. I think that what you have highlighted in terms of challenges is, I wouldn't say like exactly the same, because they are very different depending, but it's very familiar to many other countries. I raised the point related to raise awareness training, social dialogue as critical. I would like now precisely to give the floor to Catherine, the resident coordinator. Perhaps that could complement also your intervention to see how we can do better. I mean, how can we really complement the efforts that you are also undertaking in the country?
Roberto, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to be on this panel. I'm sorry to say it's timely. I feel like we should have had it a number of months ago and certainly years ago, but I'm hoping that we can really make sure that we build something sustainable around this. Also, very warm greetings to my UN colleagues and Janah as well. I'm going to kind of, for time efficiency, I'm not going to repeat the statistics and things that Janah has done, because, you know, I think we can roll off the statistics, but unless you actually sit and think about what they mean, you don't really get a true concept of how dire the situation is in the Maldives because of the impact of COVID-19. The key thing, if you just take one statistic, it's what Janah said, which is 74% of the budget is derived from tourism. Tourism stopped on the 27th of March. So if you just have one statistic, you realize how challenging it is. On top of that, the government has one of the highest and most unsustainable global debts. So there isn't a system or a kind of a pocket that the government can call on that is a buffer that enables them to be able to respond to even the most essential basic services. So the situation is challenging, and so the statistics that Janah has given you indicate that. And so, you know, we'll make sure that you have that presentation. You can see the numbers. In terms of the situation here, though, both the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank say that Maldives is going to be one of the worst hit countries in the world from the pandemic. Critically here, the challenge is that it's exposed many existing inequalities and critical needs of vulnerable people in particular. And I think that, you know, we may have talked about that in the past, but they're becoming so visible now. Often vulnerable groups are hidden. They're becoming so visible now that the situation has become so glaringly obvious in terms of the numbers, in terms of those affected. So in order to respond to them, and that's the reason that they've become so visible, is that it's identified some serious structural and systemic weaknesses in different government policies, in different historical administrative regimes. And in order to be able to really pick up from where we are and move forward without having efforts to try and go back where we were before, I think we've all started to realise here, talking to different parts of government, private sector, that we need to really now start tackling those, what have been those very difficult conversations in the past, of those very hard to resolve issues. Many of them are not politically popular. So in order, though, to kind of set the economy up and put it back on track in a way that is going to reduce the impact of the country to future external shocks, it's definitely the challenge that we face now. So just very quickly to say, because we haven't said it yet, Marina started by speaking a little bit, but I won't go into detail, but the Secretary-General has launched a response which has 5 pillars of what is the UN's response and the framework. And basically, the one core one that I just wanted to go through just briefly here with you is Pillar 3, which is on the economic response and recovery. It's about the protecting jobs, the small, medium and sized enterprise and informal sector. And it's a piece that we've done a little bit of work on here in terms of the analysis. We were one of the first countries to pull something together as a policy piece to government, because the crisis has been obviously very much related to the health response, because saving lives is number one. But at the same time, because as we've described the budget situation, the socioeconomic response is equally as important. And that's a very unusual situation for us to be in a development emergency context, that you're trying to tackle an entire economic system at the same time as doing life-saving health response. So this is what makes this pandemic and this crisis so different and so overwhelming to any humanitarian crisis that we've seen in the past. Its global nature, its long-term impacts and effects, and the way in which it's exposed so many structural and systemic inequalities. So I think just running through a couple of things in terms of the policy proposals we've made to government and that we're working on. And I've said this to colleagues, I feel a bit mercenary sometimes, because I think it's important that we do talk about how terrible the pandemic is, but how dire the situation is, that we have to look at it as also the opportunities that it gives us for doing things differently. And this is where collaboration is so much of an important thing. In a situation so bad as it is now, we have to deal in much better, much more robust, much more comprehensive partnerships with different parts of society that we haven't done well in the past. Speakers have said before, I think Roberto, you said, Marina also said, we don't always speak the same language, and not being able to kind of translate between each other means that sometimes a lot of opportunities are missed. So how is it now? Will this crisis help us to get better at trying to get down to understanding what we mean? And I truly believe that it will. So we are looking at ways of developing new partnerships that can help spread the cost and build resilience into the economy. taking the opportunity to further green sectors which create the jobs. And as it's already been mentioned also with SIDS, we've talked about this, Marina mentioned it, you know, how can we look at diversification opportunities in the economy, but also through the engagement with private sector and investors. Janah has just mentioned already this launch of the social dialogue between government and workers and employment organisations. And that's not just a conversation, it's also to define and develop what we consider to be the sustainable solutions that can be implemented. Just to say that because of the nature of previous regimes here, it's only very recently that Janah and his colleagues have managed to get this federation in place, and that's a major achievement because of the number of years we're talking about that they were trying so hard to do that. So the doors have been opened just in time now for the COVID pandemic, which means how do we then capture this opportunity now to bring that dialogue together? So the government hasn't been in a position to do that yet. How now can we say, here's what the UN's talking to government about in terms of policy for diversification of the economy. How do we use our influence and partnership with government to bring in private sector in general, but also workers? And obviously from the numbers that Janah's given you, you can understand that employers and employees are having serious challenges here. So many people are now without salaries. The rents are very high, as he's mentioned, and the situation is getting very bad. So my view is that we can now say how critical it is that the government does not try and take policy decisions that have serious budgetary or financial implications, or that will have a worse impact on the most vulnerable people. So that is our role, to have the conversation. And I see my role as also being able to dovetail Janah and his team and colleagues into that conversation. They already have that access in the background, but I think what helps is having that three-way conversation, because it really closes off the comparative advantage of each of us. Janah is a trusted counterpart of government. The UN has a very good long-standing history here. And the role of the resident coordinator now has been elevated in the sense that the government now has started to understand that the UN is not just an organization that does small-scale projects. They are now seeing me in particular, but also my senior colleagues, as providers of policy advice and expertise. And that's where our ability comes to be able to integrate people like Janah, people like different parts of the industries into certain conversations. And I just wanted to give a specific example. I have been working for 6 weeks to advocate to the government to have the conversation around the socio-economic impact. They've been very focused on the health response. If you know anything about Mali, you will understand why it's such an important issue, because it's the most densely populated piece of land in the world. So we were working so hard to avoid the transmission actually coming here. So now it's spreading quickly. So while the government's been trying to tackle that, I've been in their ear talking about, we have to talk about socioeconomic policy. We have to talk about this now. We can't wait. It's often seen as the long-term challenge. But the president has established a national task force, and within that are 3 working groups. And I was very clear with them that they can't do that and have that conversation sitting in silos within government, talking to each other. So what I've managed to achieve is to get different parts of industry into the conversation. NGOs like the Red Crescent, specialized organizations like the ILO and UNICEF when we're talking about children. So I think that is a very tangible, clear indication of how
Catherine,
advocacy
this is fascinating.
Together.
And I feel very sorry to cut you, because it's not just example, it's also how you're working together with Janah, and also Janah having set up the federation, the organization. I think that what you have brought to us is a kind of good complementary approach in a country that has also many challenges because of the tourism and the pandemic and its consequence, also the density. I think it's a really excellent, enriching approach that we learn from your activity. So thank you so much. And I just have to go quickly to the other country case, I would say, because we have the representative of our Serbian members, not the president. I think that I made a small mistake when referring, but a member of the board, a member of the board of our Serbian members, a very distinguished member, Natasha Pavlovic. But also we have the UN resident coordinator, Francois. Thank you again for joining us. You have the floor now. The idea is, again, how can we improve our cooperation? How can we increase the impact? In a different context, of course, like the one that you have in. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and good day, colleagues. Much has been said already, so I will sort of reshape a little bit what I had planned to say. To go straight into the questions. How do we increase the cooperation? As Catherine mentioned, we have the UN Secretary-General has set up this overall strategic framework for recovery, and the way it translates in 100+ countries is that the UN, jointly with the government and with some other partners, has embarked in this very large-scale sort of assessment on the socio-economic impact. And our marching orders are very clear. This is an all-encompassing assessment. So we are actually reaching out we will reach out quite substantively to the private sector. The way we want to do this is, and this will answer one of the questions that is on the chat box. We really want to reach out to the associations and the federations, not necessarily to the network like the Global Compact. The Global Compact is usually is mostly larger company, while the associations are the SMEs, and we know that the SMEs are the ones that have suffered the most, but it's also the ones that are employing the most. So one of the focus of the assessment in Serbia, but in other countries as well, is how do we bring on board the SMEs, how hard they've been hit, and what is it they need beyond the immediate support packages that many governments have put in place. So that's one thing that the organization, the associations can be linked with. And I believe the ILO in a number of regions is actually going to reach through a survey to these associations. They're certainly doing this here in the Western Balkans. That's the first thing. The other thing on how to increase the cooperation is how the different UN agencies will work. They're already working with some SMEs, but there's really a desire to come up with new solutions. And many of you have said it already. Now is the time to really promote different type of changes. So the UN, and that's UNDP, that's also UNOPS, UNICEF, are running a number of challenges. They've been doing this in the past, but now is really another opportunity. And what we call challenges is basically calls for SMEs to come up with solutions to the new now. And that's in the green sector, the green economy sector. That's also in the health sector, but that's also in the future of work. So in the UN here, we in Serbia, and again in other countries, we have started before the COVID a reflection on the future of work, and it's more relevant than ever now, because we have seen, all of us, how we have shifted our way of working. And again, this is not something that the UN is going to do on its own. It's really something that we need to interact quite extensively with the private sector, and it's definitely our intention here in Serbia. The other aspect where we can certainly increase the cooperation is on access to finance. So we've all heard a lot about the big numbers. You know, the EU will put so many billions, the US so many billions, both in their internal markets, but also in their assistance. But what this means at the local level, and again, the UN is working quite closely in this particular crisis and in the recovery phase with the international financial institutions, such as the World Bank, but also all the different regional development bank. And the idea here is to develop, and Catherine mentioned, you know, that we need to find new financing ways and new partnership. So this is what we will try and do, is how we can better integrate the, you know, the knowledge that's within the UN, the financing power that's within the IFIs, and then both the knowledge and the skills and the feet on the ground that are with the private sector. So this is something that's really gonna be challenging to do, but this is what we want to look at in the years to come as part of the COVID recovery. Now, so these are a few ideas.
François, oh, sorry, continue. Just con a little bit quick. So the
okay.
Also.
I don't want to talk fast because otherwise it's hard to understand. Now, my second point is just on the impact. We spoke about the common language. I believe that there is still a lot of communication to share on SDGs with SMEs and with the general audience. Actually, we need to really find a language where SMEs understand the value of SDGs and Agenda 2030 for them, what the opportunities that it creates, but also how they can contribute to. So that's one of the points on impact. The second point is we spoke about influencing policies together. I spent a couple of years in Brussels. There is a lot we can do in these core areas like the environment, climate change, but also social policies. And I think there will be we would have a lot more power if we do that jointly. This is, by the way, what ILO is already doing in the area of strengthening both employers' organization, labor union, but also in generating that tripartite type of interaction on negotiating new laws and new policies. And we can do this beyond the scope of work of ILO. One last point, two last points. One is on the returning laborers. Maldives has talked about their expat community. In Serbia and in other countries, we have the opposite phenomenon where we had 400,000 people returning, so people who have lost their jobs abroad. And the government here is very much intending to keep these here because they see this as a resource. So we have to, again, work out very closely with the private sector on how we can use skills that have come back, create new skills for some of these people, and integrate them. And then my final point, we are running this online survey on the UN 75, and globally, the #1 priority of people, so that's global audience, remains on climate change. And I think one of the messages I certainly want to share with the private sector is, as we rushed into, making things better, we definitely should not forget the climate change agenda. And again, this is something where the UN and the private sector, whether it's small companies or big companies, where we'll have to work together. I'll stop here. I was very short.
Well, no, but I feel very sorry. I mean, one of the things in this digital conference is that we need to optimize the time in 1.5 hours, but it's so difficult sometimes. And I think that you make a reference to the future of work, and all of a sudden we have become digital, even if we didn't want to. And that's an area where we have to do something together. That's for sure. And also, you referred to the climate change angle. And to the survey, by the way, we are collaborating with the survey with our friends in the UN 75 unit with Fabrizio. We had an exchange last week, but yeah, we are going also to do our own complementary survey to the survey of the UN, precisely on how can we build together the SDGs. So we have a final speaker precisely on Serbia. And sorry again for being strict with time, Natasha. Member of the board of the Serbian Association of Employees. If you can go quickly, I would thank you, because then we'll have the time for questions. And sorry for that. I mean, it's a problem when you are the last one.
Okay, it's okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for making these corrections. Our president, Mr. Miloš Nenazić, couldn't join us today, so excuse him, please. And I was very eager to hear what our colleague has to say, and I must say thank you very much, because what I heard today made me feel very optimistic toward the days that are coming. And thank you, Françoise, because she covered almost everything. And I hope we will meet in person here in Belgrade, and we can make some cooperation together. And I'll try to be really short today. And I could put everything in 2 words. First word is repositioning, that was mentioned by colleague Andrea. And it's very important, of course. Reposition is needed for business sector, private sector, civil organizations, and also for UN and similar organizations. Why is it like that? You have to know that I am SME. I have my own business for almost 3 decades, and it's business development and communication strategies. So my clients are also public sector, SMEs, and big companies. And what I have seen in last 2 decades was that companies were taking responsibilities towards employees, toward our environment, local communities, more and more responsibilities, and taking an active role in everyday's living. So I can say that business sector, private sector is ready not just to contribute today, not only to contribute, but to be an active part of policy making. And I think it's very important. Maybe we didn't speak the same language talking about private sector and NGOs 2 decades ago, but today I think we can understand each other. And we showed that we want to learn about each other and that we have very similar goals. That leads us to our second word today, mentioned by Marina. I think that's pushing. So we will have to push private sector, push NGO sector, but push also our governments in order to create policies that will help us to survive this crisis also, but also to make a really better world for all of us together today. And the third word that I would mention is visibility. I think we have to have visibility. Both our associations, our companies, our initiatives, and we have to make visible our partnerships as well. And maybe as one suggestion for today, I would say that UN and other similar organizations might consider significant partners, associations like our business associations or civil organizations much more than governments. If they can see us as a valuable partner, we can push, we can reposition ourselves, and we can, at the end, become visible, not only us, but our results as well. So thank you very much from Belgrade, Serbia, and I hope we will meet again.
Of course, we will meet again, and we will. I mean, this is a very exciting exchange, and this combination, resident coordinators and organization, give us, at least from the external, I mean, from Geneva, a very I wouldn't say comprehensive, but very detailed view of what's going on in the country and how you can collaborate and how you are collaborating together. So I have Shay. Shay is our representative in New York, I asked her to sum up the questions. I also want to tell you, well, I will tell at the end, we'll go quickly, and I have extended this for 5-10 minutes with your permission, and so that we can also have the overall. The questions, I would like to address with your permission, the questions to those who feel volunteer to answer in the panel, especially the rest coordinators. I think that's the best approach. Shay, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. And there are quite a few questions, so I'm going to group them together, but it's been such a rich discussion. And Françoise, you spoke quite a bit about the first question, or the area I wanted to address, which is really RCs working with the employers' federations and associations. How can we better plan, make the assessment on the ground, work together, share best practices, and ensure that We just don't have networks, as some of you had mentioned, because we do have the Global Compact on the ground and they're working very well. But how do we work more with employers, federations, associations in really trying to change policies and make systems change on the ground? So that's more or less for the RCs. There's a specific question around food security, and that's really for Maria, who I believe has left, but maybe her colleague could answer that. What is the UN doing around food security? A third group of questions around skills, and are there any good examples, particularly in the Maldives and Uganda, of efforts of trying to move low-skilled workers who have now mostly lost their jobs to really assist them in moving into the IT sector where there will be an increase in jobs? And any best practices? There was a request to share the document that you mentioned on digitalization. And lastly, there's a question around how now we're moving into this digital world, and there's a tremendous amount of work around virtual conferences, etc. How can the UN assist at country level to get this IT support and to assist not only employers, federations, and associations, SMEs, to move into this digital world? How can they support in moving into this area?
Thank you very much, Jay, for summing up the questions. I would then, I know that Marina had a problem and had to leave, and then also Francois had to leave at 3 o'clock. So I would give the floor, if you are still there, to Alain and also to Catherine. Perhaps we start with Alain, UNFPA representative, and Catherine. Perhaps you have some reaction on how we as employee organization. I think that you already referred to that, but also Catherine. But if you can elaborate a little bit more in terms of the difference from the global compacts, etc., that would be great. I don't know who wants to start. If it's Alain, perhaps.
Yeah, I can start. Because I really, it's a very good question, but very difficult to find an answer. I think we're just trying to find our ground here in something that is I think has been looming as a big challenge, especially in a country that is very young, but where nobody really knew how to go about it. Now we all of a sudden put in the boat and we have to eat as we walk, so to say. Now I would I think the framework that I've given in terms of partnerships is really where it starts, so that we have good, strong consultations with the different organizations, federations, and so forth. But here, very concretely, what we do have is these development partners coordination groups, and then the government has a very robust architecture of its own sectoral coordination groups. We need to really facilitate these dialogues, sit with these groups, and review our copies. Really see, okay, so now all of these dimensions have changed. So what does it now actually mean to create these employment or vocational skills opportunities for the digitalized economy? I think that's all I can offer at this point, but I do not know of a concrete activity that has been undertaken yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Alain. Catherine?
Thank you. There was a couple of things there I can throw something at. The first one to say is a little bit about opportunities for better engagement. One of them is that something that we do very normally in the UN in every country is to work very closely with civil society organizations, which are non-government organizations or different kinds of community groups. That hasn't been very strong in the Maldives, and since I've arrived a few months ago, I've now set up a civil society and UN forum where we will have monthly meetings talking around specific issues. The goal being for us to exchange views about the reality check. Do we see things the same way? And also, how can the UN influence government agenda by also bringing to the table the issues faced or seen from the perspective of civil society. And the conversation I had this morning also with Janah, it's made me think that perhaps we also need to do the same thing. Yeah, okay, you're nodding good. That we need to do a similar thing to kick off properly UN engagement with the private sector across the board. And I think then we can pilot for you some results around how we can tackle some of these different issues by different organizations and businesses that might be interested in some of those pieces. So I'm adding that to my to-do list. The other thing is there was a question around food security. What is going on food security? From our side, we have the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, that is coming in with a $20 million program that it's been a year and a half in development, but it's launching in June, so the timing couldn't be better. Maldives imports most of its food. So what we're having now is a very clear shift by government, and I spoke with the Minister of Agriculture the other day, where all her advocacy over many years, again, the opportunity of COVID has now highlighted the need for more sustainability within the Maldives for growing our own food. So that is the shift, and that is happening. The government has now set aside a number of particular islands which will be fully dedicated to agricultural production. Then there was one question in the feed, Baruch, I think, mentioned what's the UN doing in terms of the labour market post-COVID. This is where I really think we need to work together. We can't come up with this ourselves. We can, from a UN perspective, look at it objectively from the outside and do our assessment, but we're not in the business sector ourselves. So I think we rely very much on ILO, and my colleague Simran is on the line. We rely very much on ILO for labour policy. We rely very much on UNDP in particular for working with business sector and small medium enterprise. But I think we need to create a situation where businesses are part of that conversation, because it's the real time, what does it look like every day? So we can come up with the policies and best practices around it, but we need to test case it, reality check it, and brainstorm it with you. They're just some initial thoughts, Roberto, I think.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I think it's very, very, again, pertinent, your suggestions. Is there any other comments from the other panelists, Natasha, Janah, or it's okay, so that we are finishing on time?
I think I'll just add to, sorry, Janah here. I'll just add to what Catherine just said. You know, food security has been a very important. I think Maria also mentioned Trinidad and Tobago. We are similar island state, a small island state. I think this has been an ongoing discussion for several years. And I think because the country is spread 1,200 kilometers from north to south, we have 93,000 square kilometers of water and 1,200 islands. So it's a huge challenge, you know, and as Catherine just said, we import everything. So I think with this new situation, the food security, warehousing and other, measures should be taken across the country, and I think it is being taken in a positive way. And I hope this time when we come out of this, it would be another positive thing that would happen. And we in the private sector would definitely work with the United Nations and with the government, and at policy level, we will support. And I'm sure even the private sector would participate in any initiative like that. And
Thank
there
you
are
so much.
already, and there are already some islands that are given to make big warehousing and in the south and north. And I think if that is done, we would be quite safer than where we are now.
Thank you. Natasha?
Thank you, Roberto. I just wanted to add that I completely agree with Catherine. And it's very important for all of us to have this cooperation with ILO, with UNDP and other organizations, but it's even of greater importance to sit around the table and to talk on a daily basis, because we have to build our own world with their help as well. Thank you, Catherine, for mentioning that.
Thank you so much. So just to tell you that this is not just a digital exchange among ourselves. This is the first, we started with a letter to the UN on how employers, business organizations can liaise better with the resident coordinators. So this is the first step, and I want to thank again Andrea, the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation. I think this has been helping and supporting us in a great manner. CAS. We will cooperate and we'll continue this dialogue. We have brought here examples which more or less start working or have been working for a while, but there are other examples in which we have still challenges in bringing together the resident coordinators and also the employers and business organization. And of course, the role of ILO and other UN agencies is critically important. And we will be continuing this not just exchange. We are going to produce a report out of this discussion with action-oriented points that can help also for the future. And we are going also to arrange other exchanges with much more specific topics. So thank you to all of you again. And I hope that you have also enjoyed, as I have, this conversation, this exchange. We are looking forward to know from you. Keep safe with your families, keep connected, and let's move forward. Thank you again to all of you.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you. Keep safe.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.